Your communications and relationship at work. I am Jeff Bowie, and this is Julie Pham. Hi, Julie. Dr. Julie, excuse me. And one of the things we're really trying to do is we're trying to talk to people who are, working in business, in tech, in hiring, especially in sales, so the world I come from as a recruiter, to go deep about some specific issues. Today, I want to talk to Julie, who's written a book and is an expert in curiosity-based culture and relationships, as well as figuring out how to transform your group. So I'm going to hand it over to Julie. My mission is to help hiring managers make their lives easier by weeding out B players. B player meaning sort of something very subjective to everybody else's world. So sometimes it's uncovering that diamond in the rough. Sometimes people are working, trying to wade through tons of resumes to find that right person. And sometimes they're using like an automated tool that they just know they're leaving some people behind. So that's the world that we live in. So we help people try to figure out how to navigate some of that and make the efficiency on the front end make the efficiency easier on the front end, increase efficiency. There we go. And then also make sure that there's retention on the back end so that there's not this hidden cost of losing people. And Julie, I want to talk to you a lot about retention because I think a lot of your work is geared around toward getting people, maximizing their potential. Is that a fair statement? So give us a 30-second commercial of who you are. Pitch anything that you want. Talk about your book. I can bring up some screenshots of stuff that you want, but I want to hear a little bit about you and what we're going to talk about.
Jeff, thank you so much for inviting me. So, Julie Pham, I founded Curiosity Based, which is a organizational development company, which is based here in Seattle, Washington. And we help people practice curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace, because that is where we spend most of our waking hours. And I just wrote 7 Forms of Respect, a guide to transforming your communication and relationships. And it's a framework to help people articulate what they need in the workplace and to help companies actually articulate their culture.
That's really great. I think one of the really important questions that we can be asking, right, is what is culture? We all know that culture is an important thing, but how do we define it? So it sounds like you've got to dig into the framework about what it looks like in your world to maximize it, to craft it. I don't want to take words out of your mouth. Why did you write the book, I guess, is really where I want to start.
Oh, so I wrote the book because I saw that there was just friction in how people expected to be treated, and they didn't have the words. And so a lot of people talk about respect, and it's like, well, I just want to be respected, and I want respect at work. And so then I realized, people have actually different ideas of what respect looks like. And so I think we can all, when I ask people what does respect mean, we describe it as a feeling. There's a sense of feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling admired, feeling acknowledged. And yet, when I ask, well, what do people need to do to show you respect? That's when people talked about, well, I want people to be on time, or I want people to use honorifics, or I want people to prepare to come prepared in the way that I ask them to. I want them to show consideration. There are all of these different different forms that they described, and that's why I wrote the book, to kind of help people articulate actually what they mean by respect.
Get their own terminology, their own language out into their work world so that people understand them better. Is it a way it sounds like a two-way street?
Yeah. And also because sometimes it can feel, when you say, I want you to respect me. It's like, well, I am respecting you, right? And we're kind of going back and forth, having different ideas about this one word. And so it's actually to give people language to describe, be more specific about what we mean by it, so that we can actually get it. And also so that's at the individual level. And then there's also at the team and the organizational level. What does an organization mean by culture? What does a team mean by culture? I think oftentimes people talk about it in terms of, we're innovative, we're respectful, we're forward thinking. And yet I think of culture as, how do you behave? What are your actions? What are those normalized actions that people, and behaviors that people that are acceptable? And so So, for example, is multitasking acceptable or not? Because that is going to some people see multitasking as a sign of performance and other people see it as just rude, right? And so to kind of know, hey, what are
Interesting.
the when I join this team, how are we gonna interact with one another? And then also um, how do I ask for respect in the forms that matter to me?
Wow, that's a so that really brings it down to a very identifiable, demonstrable level.
Mhm.
It seems, but it also seems pretty fraught with danger. If you're a my role tends to be sales
Mhm.
managers or sales leaders, but if you're building a team, you're leading a team. How do you how do you do this? I mean, I realize you wrote the book, and maybe
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
answer
yeah, yeah.
here, and
No,
you can
no,
walk
no,
me
no.
through some of that framework.
So
But
so the
hearing some of
first
those terms
so the
is
first is so actually if you think about how does culture how do expectations and norms form? It's kind of what the team leader or what the organizational leader does,
mhm.
right? People follow what people follow what you do, not what you say. They do what you do, not what you say you do, right? And so you can say, hey, it's really important that when we are in meetings that we give each other attention. And yet if that person's multitasking or kind of checking out or looking away, then or they don't have their camera on
Right,
in a
or the
virtual meeting, then what is that? Then people are just, oh, well, it's okay to do this because the leader is doing this.
or yeah,
Um,
or the leader says sales leader says, "You go out there and you gotta make 100 cold calls and sell and meet these quotas," and they haven't demonstrated they can do that or aren't helping coach along the way. Is that similar?
yeah, yeah. And there's like, and so then how are people supposed to feel like there's a sense of accountability if the leader doesn't even do it?
What
Right.
about but when you have a difference of roles? I mean, obviously, a sales leader, or especially manager, isn't going to make 100 cold calls a
Yeah.
day.
Mhm.
How
Yes.
how do you bring this granularity to that conversation? How do you get people to feel they're respected?
So let's actually take a step back and think first, just general, what how do we determine what are the forms of respect that there should be on a
Great,
team?
yes,
So
back us up.
let's look at like at a team level, because the current model is what the leader does, other people see as acceptable. And I mean, they may not exactly follow it, but because and I'll get to hierarchy, and that's one of the dimensions of the seven forms of respect. But at least they're just like this person has set the norm. What we haven't asked is actually are those behaviors the best behaviors to support your shared work?
Okay,
So because like for a sales team, right? It's just like, hey, we are trying to get this particular service, this particular software out to the world, and it's going to uh, and there are certain things that we need to do to serve our customers to make sure that they're using it, that we have the impact that we want through that software, that they're successful and that they come back, right?
okay,
And so then it's just, well, are the certain forms of respect that the sales leader or that the leader is modeling right now, that person's just personal preferences, or does it actually help support the work, and why? What's the internal logic? Because oftentimes we don't ask what the logic is. It's just like, well, I because I do it this way or because I like it. And
mhm,
so
mhm.
it's just that let's take a step back and actually think about the work that we do, and then what needs to happen to support that work. So if you're building something, so for example, if you've got a product that's really baked and you've sold it many times and it needs to be done in a very particular way, then maybe procedure is going to be really important. But if you got, I know sometimes with startups, with software companies, it's just we don't. There's a lot of glitchiness in this. And so we're trying to, and we don't want the customer to know that. So we're going to like love on them with lots of customer service, right? To
Right,
hide the glitchiness
right. It
because
doesn't
we
work that
don't
well, but if
actually
we
have an established procedure because it's not working the way it's supposed to work. So we're going to, so,
mhm.
and so you kind of have to think what's our, what's our shared work?
That's an okay
And
thing, right? You're saying
yeah, it's an
that's
okay thing.
fine as
It's an
long as
okay
we're
thing.
aligned with why we're doing it.
Because it also reflects the reality of whatever the situation is.
I love
And
that.
so and that's another thing, Jeff, is that respect is dynamic too. So a lot of times people talk about respect as if it's fixed, as if it's universal, as if we mean the same thing, and yet it's actually dynamic. And so even, there are three dimensions to the seven forms of respect. And the first one is hierarchy. So you kind of mentioned it. And so the way that we think about respect can, and what we expect and what we give can differ depending on if that person has more power, equal power, or less power. And for when you're a salesperson, your customer has more power
Hmm. Yeah.
and your vendor has less power. And maybe the people who you're working with, maybe like if you're an account executive, if you're working with your account managers, those are your peers, they're your collaborators. And so how you interact is can depending on that hierarchy. And I think it's just important to recognize. I see a lot of companies now who are just like, oh, we're all equal, everything's flat, and it's like, no, it isn't. And when we pretend that it isn't, then we're doing a disservice, actually, because there's a lack of clarity.
So dig in on that just a little bit, because I think it's really interesting. You saying
Mhm.
that when we say, "Oh, we're flat, everybody's equal," we're just going to remove the barriers. It can do a disservice.
Yes, because someone is the decision maker.
Ultimately, someone has to
Someone
say, "The
is the
buck stops
decision
here."
maker, right? And so what can happen in organizations where it's just, oh, well, if you're really, there is this appearance of consensus, and yet at the end of the day, someone has to make a decision that maybe not everyone agreed to because it's actually the best thing for the business or for the organization, then that could feel like a wait, that's not what I thought we were
Hmm.
doing. And so because I mean uh with authority comes responsibility. Right, so
Sure.
that decision maker is making a decision, and they're also taking the responsibility, hopefully, if they're a good leader, for when it doesn't go, if it doesn't go well. So, and just having that clarity in an organization, that hierarchy can actually provide clarity. And in general, though, um, what I'm trying to do is to provide clarity, to get people to talk about what
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
mean versus guessing.
And I wanted to ask you to sort of break down what those seven forms are in a second, but I want to just one last little bit on this
Mhm,
this hierarchy flat concept. I've done a lot of personality assessments, and
mhm,
a lot of times when you use them in my world, you have to say there's no bad assessment. What we have to understand is how to connect with somebody who might differ and how to bend or meet someone in the middle. And as long as the teams that I've worked with can say, "Okay, great, I understand that so and so needs to multitask, but I can't," and we'll language around that so that we lower stress and there's less of a misunderstanding when things do happen. Is that a similar thing that you're talking about with being heard and being understood, and when someone has to
Jeff,
finally.
that's a really good question because a lot of people think that some forms of respect in the assessment is going to be, it's like respect styles. And then afterwards, we go around and we say, these are my, these are my forms of respect. Always give me respect in this way.
Right.
And that's actually not the way it works. It's actually much more dynamic. And so I think of the assessment actually not so much as to measure, but actually as it's a series of questions that help people get more aware of,
Okay.
oh, this is what matters to me, and I hadn't thought about that behavior meaning this. And so, and then we in our full assessment, we ask them, what do you do in terms of those? What would you give in terms of someone who has more power,
Hmm.
equal power, or less power? And so it's actually complementary to those. I do think that with Enneagram or with Myers-Briggs, it's just okay. Here is who I am,
Right. A little bit
and
of
how
space.
do I interact. And so with some forms of respect, it's just like this is how I interact in this relationship with this power dynamic. And it may change. And it's actually at work, what's more important is what are we saying are the forms of respect that we are going to prioritize on this team,
Mm. Hmm.
regardless of what our individual preferences are. Because it's actually really hard to keep track of like, oh, well, Jeff likes this and Julie likes this. And that means this. And I always have to do this, right? It's just, well, actually, on a team, can we agree that when we are together, regardless of what you like individually, that when we are together, that multitasking is okay,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you're not going to feel like about it because it's just like we've decided that we have so many things going on, and it's okay to deprioritize attention. And what we really need to prioritize though is candor. So that may make you feel uncomfortable. And yet on the team, we've decided that that's what we need to support our shared work. And so it actually is, it helps people understand what their personal preferences are. Um, and to kind of just like a one-on-one relationship say, hey, this is what I like. But at the same time, it's a negotiation, right? Because maybe
Right.
I can say, I want this, and you can say, well, I can't give it to you because of this. And it's actually more about sparking that conversation.
Yeah.
And Jeff, I'm actually give you a analogy here of how to understand the layers, because I think this is something that isn't in these the personality assessments. And so at the organizational level, I use the analogy of language, right?
Hmm.
So at the organizational level, a organization's preferred prioritized forms of respect, let's say the top 3 4, that's the national language.
Okay.
And then you think about the different teams, like the sales team, the engineering team, the marketing team, they're speaking regional dialects
Hmm.
because they've got their own team leaders and their own function and their own priorities and their own particular work, right? And then there's me, the individual. And the people who do best in an org or in anywhere are those who can be multilingual, who can adapt. And so it's actually about being aware of how do we be adaptive?
Hmm.
How
Hmm.
can we be adaptive? And then also understanding that there are some things that we don't, uh, that we actually just don't want to do. And then there's that question of like, well, is this the place for me then? Is this the
Yeah.
place for me?
Yeah. That's really interesting. So figuring out, and again, I talk a lot about retention and how to leaders of all kinds keep the people that are valuable, grow them to their most. And if this is a conversation, do I stay here? Is this the right
Mhm,
place for me? I mean,
mhm.
nothing's perfect, but let me pause here.
Yeah.
Does it make sense for you to break down what these 7
Oh, yeah,
forms
yeah, yeah.
are
So,
real quick?
yes,
Just
yes, yes,
give,
yes.
and
So
I can, like I said, I can.
yeah, yeah,
There's a
yeah,
there's a quiz I can show everybody later
yeah.
if you want to open that up. But just talk to us about what are these 7 forms?
Okay. So, yes. So the 7 forms, we like to use the acronym PICA, PPICCAA, and it stands for I'll say all 7 and then I'll go back and explain each one. So there's procedure, punctuality, information, candor, consideration, acknowledgement, and attention. And so procedure is about established rules and norms.
Okay.
And so it could look like, for example, it could look like, hey, I sent out prep work for this meeting, and I actually expect you to do the prep work.
Hmm.
Now, some people can send out prep work or be like, here's the agenda, but oh, you didn't read, that's fine, not a problem. Right. But others are like, you
Prep
didn't read
work.
my agenda, you didn't come
Right.
prepared.
Hmm.
Right. So that's one procedure.
Okay.
Or even another example of that could just be, before you ask me how to do something, go read what we already have on how to do it. So, and others are,
Like RTFM.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I don't know what RTFM is.
Read the manual
Okay,
before
read the
calling
manual.
the
Yeah,
text
yeah,
support.
right. And then the next one is punctuality. Now, punctuality is not about valuing time. It's about valuing time constraints.
Okay.
And what that means is you come on time, you let people know that if you're going to be late, you come early to prepare so it starts on time. You let people know, hey, we have 5 minutes left in this meeting, that kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
Then there's information. So this is access to open. This is open access to knowledge, to data. This could also look like, hey, I'm going to CC you on this email, even though you don't need to be there.
Okay.
I'm going to invite you to meetings, even though you don't need to be there, because I just want you to feel, included. And so for some people, including myself, I'm like a information on a need to know basis only. That's my individual one. But on my team, they just want information, information, information. And Jeff, I want to be very clear. I don't use the word transparency, because
Okay.
transparency is loaded. Transparency is good, and the lack of transparency is bad. Information for all of these 7 forms, actually, they just some you may prioritize it or you may not prioritize it. It's not good or bad. It just is.
Okay.
The next one is candor, and so that is it's like information, but with the intent to change something.
Okay.
And so this one is, it could be unsolicited feedback. This could be playing devil's advocate. This, you're pushing down to create some kind of change.
And candor generally connotes some sort of honesty or at least belief. Like
I
I'm
don't like
telling
to
you
use the
my
word,
opinion.
so, and I don't like to use the word honesty
Okay.
because the opposite of honesty is you're kind of like, if you're saying like it's honest, then it's just like, oh, if you don't have candor, that means you're dishonest. No, it just means that
Interesting. I love that.
that you don't want to just give your constructive feedback on how someone can do that job better, because you may say like, that's rude, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to hurt someone's feeling, whatever. There's so many different reasons
Yeah.
for not doing that. um and then there is consideration. Now consideration is actually, of the seven forms, the most complex.
Okay.
So consideration is about doing something, interacting with someone based on what you think that they want. So this is not asking them. This is doing something based on what you think. So it's like, Jeff, oh, I know Jeff really likes Mexican food. So I'm gonna surprise him with tacos for lunch.
Okay.
Because this is like, I think you would like that. Right. And so um and other people are just like, no, just ask me. I don't want to be surprised. I don't want to, I don't want. So here in the workplace, I'm giving you an example in the workplace. So someone leaves, someone comes back from family leave and they're exhausted and they keep saying like, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I have no capacity. And then their manager is just, well, I want to assign them, put them on this interesting, challenging work, but they're so exhausted. So how can I do that? And maybe I shouldn't, right? And so if they're going to give consideration, it's like, "Oh, I'm not going to do that because I'm hearing how exhausted they are."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the person on the getting side, the person who just came back from family leave may say, oh, thank goodness my manager didn't ask me because I'm exhausted. And then they may also say, I want it to be asked anyway. I
Sure.
just want it to be asked. Right. And so and then there is acknowledgement and attention. So with acknowledgement, that is praise, that's gratitude, that's yeah, that's it's good job. You're Jeff, you're amazing. Like, I love the way that you did that. And then there's attention, and this is that careful listening. This is not multitasking. This could be also not interrupting, and so yes, those are the seven forms.
Wow.
And I
That's
want to be clear,
yeah.
it's not about getting all seven.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not
So
about getting all seven. I think a
not a
lot of people have
checklist.
this misconception that the more I have, the more respectful I am. And that's not the case. It's actually about figuring out which are the ones that matter to you and which are the
Okay.
ones that you prioritize, and then which are the ones that you don't prioritize and why. Because actually, I really stress not trying to be perfect. We will get exhausted if we try to do all seven, because some of them can actually conflict. And um, and that goes for organizations too. Organizations should not try to do all seven. They should try to figure out, these are the ones we prioritize and these are the ones we don't prioritize, and this is why, and to be unapologetic about that.
So the process is to start and say, look, these are my top 3 or 4. We're going to really focus on these and not ignore the others. I'm sure, but
Yeah,
through,
I mean,
through your
because it kind of
process.
it comes down to, there are going to be times where we have to prioritize one over the other,
Hmm.
right? Because it's just so are we yeah, they're going to be, do we give a consideration, and candor can be, sometimes this comes up like, oh, I don't want to bring up that thing that is really sensitive
Hmm.
because I don't know how they're going to feel about it,
Yeah.
right? When the candor is like, I just need to understand. I'm going to ask you, right?
Right.
And those are so that's how it's just about prioritizing, figuring out which ones you prioritize. And I think what's more important actually is to ask yourself why, and to ask for the team to also ask themselves why.
Okay.
Because people remember reasons, they remember the stories and the reasons that you tell, versus versus just like, this is what.
Back to the top down thing you were saying is like, do it
Yeah.
my way because I said so.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff, as you're hearing these, do you think any of them kind of resonate with you?
These particular forms of respect.
Yeah. Like, are you like, oh, that's definitely me. That's
You know,
definitely one that I care about.
well, absolutely, and what makes me think, especially like, so my in my past as a sales trainer, I was with Sandler, and we have this thing called the upfront contract, And what it allows me to do is say, listen, and I work with people all the time. It's like I'm kind of a loudmouth, and I'm in
Mhm.
your face, and I move around a lot, and I might get excited. Is it okay with you, right? And get permission based, to tell me if it's too much, or maybe there's an element of the candor. I might just say my opinion, but it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that that's the only thing that I care about. Is are you gonna are we okay? Are we on the same page? And so I look at these, and I think, oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that matters in every conversation,
Mhm.
and not being able to obviously handle all of them, trying to would blow your mind. So does that, I don't know, that sort of
Yeah, and
answers
so
your
and then when
question?
you think about that can't like, that's important to you, like, to ask that, um, why? Like, in thinking about, like, who modeled that for you? Was that
Mhm.
something that you saw in your family? Was that something you saw with your first manager? Was that part of the training that you received, and that was, this is they tell you, and then it became part of your own just standard, practice? And so there's the what, and then there's the why.
And is that part of your training and your process, is to sort
Yeah,
of
it's really to get
really
people
dig
to
into.
understand. It's really to get people to understand why you care about what you care about. And it can be so, I talked about the 3 dimensions, and the first one being hierarchy. The second one is give versus get. And so that is the way that we like to give respect can be different from the way we like to get it.
Mhm.
So, for example, maybe you like to give people unsolicited constructive feedback and play devil's advocate, but you don't like it when people do that to you.
Right.
So, and then there's also the hierarchy that can affect that. And then the third one is actually what matters to you. What actually matters to you so much that you will do it no matter what, even if it's difficult, even if it's inconvenient, even if you know it doesn't matter to the other person because it matters to you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Versus the things that you do to accommodate other people because you're like they like it, but it doesn't really matter to you. And then there are the things that you actually don't like. And maybe you do because it's that's the norm, that's the expectation. So maybe you're in an organization where acknowledgement is really big and it feels superficial to you. All these
Mhm.
high fives and yay and like emojis, it's just like, oh my gosh, but I'm gonna do it because I don't want people to think that I'm gonna add that emoji because that's the expectation here.
Right.
And even if you don't like it, and because the thing is, we will actually. Uh, Sometimes it's just like, well, that's the expectation, and but then you have to ask yourself, like, I really like. "Ugh, I really don't like that, and it's really beginning to bug me, and that's when we get to Jeff, what I call the rubber band rule.
Oh, right. Yeah,
The
the
rubber
rubber
band rule, and
band rule.
so, when I asked people when I was doing my research and I asked people, "Hey, what does respect look like? What does it mean to you?" And so a lot of people talk about the golden rule, treat people the way that you wanna be treated.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing is with the golden rule is what if they don't wanna be treated the way that you wanna be treated? And then there's the platinum rule, which
Right.
is treat people the way they wanna be treated. And so the thing about the platinum rule is they may not tell you, they may not know themselves, and that's where it's just like, does that actually matter to me, or do I think it should matter to me?
Mhm.
And then there is what I call the rubber band rule. And the rubber band rule, so I've got a rubber band here. With the rubber band rule, we are actually, as humans, we're able to stretch, right? We're able to be flexible, and we're able to accommodate other people. But at some point, there may be some things that we actually don't like to do. Like all these superficial high fives, amazing, wonderfuls are really getting to me. and I want to only be given a compliment when I think they mean it. Right. And so what can happen is over time, we can snap and break like a rubber band. And so with the rubber band rule, it's actually about identifying what are my breaking points?
Okay.
What's going to make me snap? And Jeff, you mentioned retention earlier, right? And how do we retain people? And part of that is helping people understand what are their breaking points, because sometimes people leave and they're like, "Oh, that place was toxic. It was a horrible
Mhm.
workplace,"
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And
See all the time.
maybe they didn't name what they needed because they didn't even know what they needed,
Yeah. So
right?
it's a
And
sticky,
then, and
hard
we don't
thing.
have that conversation.
Well,
We don't,
people,
and
and
sometimes you can't accommodate someone's. Oh, you need this thing. Well, we can't do that. But at least there's a conversation rather than like, oh, it's just toxic, horrible.
Yeah, I hear that conversation sometimes, and or that talk track about, oh, it was terrible, it was toxic, and you wonder how much control they were they had over that situation. And I guess, I mean, that's the wrong way of putting it, but if there was a two-way conversation, or if there was respect in the office, what does that look like? Like, give me an example of a before and after. Of what does a toxic environment look like,
Mhm.
and when you get to work with people, when people, you use you know your frameworks,
Mhm. It
what's
looks
the
more like
outcome?
more conversations.
Hmm.
It looks like basically let's have more conversations rather than assuming the intent or the reasoning behind what people do so that we can actually understand where we're coming from. And it looks like then a hey, we can start to change this expectation and to, or to have more clarity around this. So one of the things when I work with teams is first we'll just do a hey, what are the current forms of respect that are being practiced,
Okay,
right?
so
And
it's how you
then
start to get a
yeah,
baseline.
right, just like baseline, right? And then and you know what normally happens is because the leader will be like, oh, those are mine. Why do you think that is? Right? And because again, the leader is kind of modeling that. And
Okay.
then there's a conversation of like, well, what do we actually need to do to support? What's our shared work? And then what's the nature of our work? And then what do we need to, what are the ones that we actually need to prioritize? And then then there's the work of doing that because all of the forms are actually hard
Yeah,
because they
definitely.
actually all require accountability. It's one thing to say it. How often have you been on meetings where someone does something that's kind of against the norms, and you know what they do? By the way, here are the norms again. Let's just read through the norms. And they don't say, "Hey, you broke the norm." Or you did, right? That person is just like, "Let's all read the norms again," right? As
Sort of
if
a
like
passive
reading the
aggressive way
yeah,
of
right? As if
making
as if
pointing out
reading the
somebody's.
norms again. Let's
Yeah.
just read aloud the norms and remind each other of the norms rather than saying, "Hey, I think we agreed on candor."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what that means is, um, if we're going to do this publicly in a group, then you will receive that with curiosity
Hmm.
versus being defensive, right? And so that's that kind of thing of just how to is and all of this takes work, and that can be. I mean, I had a team where they agreed that candor was going to be that they prioritized that, and then once we started taking them through that work, they a lot of them were angry because they were like, "I don't like this.
Interesting.
I don't like this," right? And so that's another thing, it's just like it actually takes work, and also to really ask yourself, "Do you need it?" Like, is punctuality so important that you will start a meeting even when people aren't there?
Right.
So, yeah.
So I hear you saying that you can do the work by starting off picking, understanding your top forms.
Mhm,
Eh, but everybody's got 100 things going on at once. At
mhm,
what point does this rise to the top one or two priorities so that a team? I mean, do you have to wait until a team's broken? Because you know as well as I do that I ain't got no time for another meeting, another conversation. People just need to get to work and do their job.
mhm. And yes, I hear that, Jeff, I hear that a lot. And I think it's if you think of this as a single purpose, then yes, it could feel like, wow, we're spending a lot of time having this conversation trying to explain what our behavior should be. And I don't think of it as having a single purpose and a single
Hmm.
function.
Hmm.
I actually think of it as having multiple functions at the same time. You're getting a twofer, you're getting a threefer, right? And so when you pause to have a conversation about trying to understand, hey, I right now I'm not getting, for example, in this uh, at the meeting last week, you didn't invite me. I felt excluded, and I just like to understand why. How do you decide who's going to be invited? I want to understand. Is there anything that in that meeting that you think I shouldn't know? Just having that conversation, and so what I just did was I modeled this structure we have called CAFA, CAFA, which is context, action, feeling, and then ask. And that last part, that asking a question to initiate the conversation
Okay.
is really key. So, but going back to the time part, right? it's just like, okay, well, if I just feel like, here I have to go and explain this thing. But actually, another way to think about this, I'm having this conversation to foster um, understanding, and I'm also doing it to build capacity on this to have them. If we have this conversation, they will also learn how to have this conversation with other people.
Okay.
It's not just like this one off, right? And also, we're also going to build, when having a difficult conversation like that, we are also going to build trust, because it's through having these, even just the reflecting on who and what influence how I think about respect,
Hmm.
that's building trust. And so there are multiple things that are happening. It's
Yeah.
not just about trying to understand. It's like, okay, you're building connection. And in this world of when so many people are working remotely and people say like, we don't have the water cooler. Well, this is how you get to the water cooler.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Now you're
So,
hitting
so
something
there's
really.
like there's multiple things that are happening. It's not just this one off conversation to clear this thing. It's actually, um you are investing in building that relationship and deepening that trust. Um and then also when someone is then later, like even breaking the silos across an org too,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Just like, oh, how do we, um now that I had this conversation, that person's much more willing to share with me other things. So it's kind of just like, how do I just see that this is not just has one function?
And how much time does it take? Human behavior obviously doesn't change overnight.
Mhm.
How much time did it take, especially for, I can imagine I can think of 100 of them, sales managers who would just roll their eyes when someone said, "Well, you didn't invite me to the meeting." It's like, oh, for goodness sake, just get, how do, there are some people who are just going to take, no matter what they're learning, it's going to take a
Mhm.
little bit longer. What's the time frame look like for teams to
That's always
find
really,
success?
I mean, this is the it depends on a person's willingness to learn, because that is an obstacle. So
So can we
basically, if
can
someone
we
if someone
hire for
says, "I
that?
have nothing to learn," right? I
Hmm.
have nothing to learn, you have to change,
Right.
then that's gonna take a lot longer,
Yeah.
right? Versus someone who's, I'm here to learn, I'm here to, I know that there are things I don't know, and then even and also can the leader model that? Because and I think that actually that that goes a long way when the leader can model like, "I don't know." Like, and
Hmm.
asking a question not in a way that's just like, "Why didn't you do that?" It's like,
Right.
"Hey, what was your thinking behind that? I wanna understand." Right? And so if you wanna reduce time, essentially, it's just like thinking about, well, how's leadership modeling this? And then how does that create that space for people to feel safe to say, like, "I don't know," or "Let's have this conversation." Um, uh, and yet, like, the baseline is someone's willingness to learn. Because, I mean, Jeff, I've been asked, like, how can this apply to toxic relationships?
Hmm. Hmm.
How can
Sure.
this apply to it's I've also heard like, I'm respectful, but other people aren't, right? And other people have got the problem, and I want them to change. And the
Sure.
thing is, then it's just, well, actually, how do you first look at yourself? And so this is actually what I think of as a practice of curiosity. And
Okay.
so, because actually, with in some forms of respect, it actually just it's a practice in curiosity. And I'm saying practice curiosity intentionally here, because I don't think of curiosity as a trait. I actually think of it as a practice. And I liken that practice to meditation. And if you think about meditation, it looks really easy and it's so hard to be still, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard for meditation. And so with practicing curiosity, there are going to be times where it's harder or easier. And when you said like how long is it going to take? Like a practice is like continual, right? Because
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
well, maybe I've gotten to a place of like I'm better at it, right? Because I'm willing to um uh I'm willing to actually try to listen now versus just thinking about how I'm going to respond. Um and yet we can all get complacent. So I just want to be really clear that there's not this destination where it's like, and now I'm an expert and now I don't have to do anything and I can cruise.
True. And I guess maybe a better way of asking would have been like, when did teams see results
Mhm.
And I realize that the variability is huge, because if you have people who aren't willing to practice curiosity, your
So I
chances are probably pretty low of success in the
Yeah,
first
and
place.
so I think it's about, I mean, so I've I have a learning experience that's called getting curious about our assumptions,
Okay.
and so that's acknowledging that we make assumptions and acknowledging the shame that we can feel around assumptions, and so some people come in saying like, "I don't make assumptions.
Mhm.
No assumptions here. My mind is pure. Other people make assumptions though." Right? And right? And
Yeah.
so actually even in this, I mean, you're asking about time, like even in this 2-hour session in the small group guiding, getting people to acknowledge that they make assumptions and then to talk about those assumptions with other people, the wrong assumptions they make, and then to ask themselves, why did I make that? Not in a I shouldn't make them, but like why did I make it?
Mhm, mhm.
And so even that, I mean, it actually really, you can't do this by yourself. So
Sure.
it's actually like in this group, in your team, are people, the one of the variabilities is, are people willing to do this together? So, Jeff, one of the reasons why I landed on curiosity and why I'm so passionate about curiosity is because in my in my years of community building, what I saw was bringing people together from really diverse backgrounds where they had no financial incentive to be together, right? These are volunteers coming together for a cause. And some people would leave the movement early, or some people would be really frustrated by the end. And others were just like, this was amazing. This was amazing. And I was like, what's the difference? And it had to do with their ability to practice curiosity.
Mhm.
And so for some people, it's just I didn't get the outcome that I wanted. So
Yeah,
we have failed,
yeah.
right? And other people on that same team could be like, "Oh my gosh, I learned so much. We created something out of nothing. Look at this." Right? And so what I saw was on in groups, those who, if you had more people who could practice curiosity, they would actually shift the morale. They could actually uplift the morale because curiosity is contagious. And the inverse can happen. You get more people who are like, and this can be a lot with salespeople, right? Like, we didn't hit our numbers. We didn't hit our numbers, right? And
Right,
that means
right,
that we
right.
failed, right? And so, how do we shift that question from what did we achieve to what did we learn? And if you have more of that, then going back to like that, how fast is this? How you can move faster, actually. I mean, with like you gotta go slow to go fast, right? It's just like
Right.
and that culture part, right? Like if you spend the time building the culture and having those hard conversations. I mean, another work that we take teams through that's very difficult is actually giving feedback to each other, constructive
Sure.
feedback to each other. Not like theoretically, how do I give feedback? But no, you're going to practice it right now with each other, and that is scary. Right? And yet that could, like, we can do that in a few hours if people are willing to do it.
So, right. So it really sounds like if someone has a few hours to explore, to be open and honest, they can really make a lot of progress in terms of cracking cracking the shell a little bit.
Yeah, like starting, I mean, we think, I'm just like, how do we help people start this practice or get deeper into the practice of it? And it really is practice. It's not, "Oh, here are the steps." Because, what I've learned, because a lot of the way that we work is we'll do small groups so we can actually do hands-on coaching.
Hmm.
I can explain to someone a structure,
Sure.
but when I see how they, or I can explain to someone, "Hey, how do you write or how do you give this person feedback?" And every time we go into it, and there are all these different interpretations, and
Yeah.
often they're like, sometimes they're passive, they're like totally not on point. There's like, what is your point? It's just like, oh, let's coach so that you can have clarity, conciseness, and directness.
So I have a couple more questions, and I want to. We have some chats.
Mhm,
Some people who have been commenting. If you have any
mhm,
questions for Dr. Julie, post them in the chat. We'll handle this in a second. Then I also want to go through and sort of give you a chance to show maybe your book or your videos, because they're very, very helpful. But one of the things that I'm thinking about is, what is the size of company that this really benefits? Like, if you've got a before and an after, is it anything? Is it a mom and pop startup? Is it a 1,000, 10,000 person company? Does it
Mhm.
matter?
Mhm.
I realize, taking into account the work that goes into it can be, longer.
Right, right, right. So, I mean, I we've worked with small and mid-size
Hmm.
teams, and then teams within big companies.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
haven't done it where it's just like here's a 10,000 person company
And
across
large
the board
that
yet.
that's
Mhm,
hard to do in
mhm,
bureaucracy anyway.
mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah. So, and so much of this is just the willingness of the leader and the team to just lean in.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
How does someone hire for curiosity?
Oh, there are so I there are some interview questions I like to ask.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear these.
And so it's so first is just to talk about a time when you tried something, when you tried to learn something that and not work related, and what did you learn from that? And so one of my favorite examples hearings, it was talking to an engineer, and he's just like, I tried to learn Bollywood dance. And, you know, and just like and their willingness to just to engage in the process, and the hearing how they talk about it, and are they focused on the achievement? Because for this person, like, it was really hard, and I just kept going, but I didn't, I never got good at it. It was fun though,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And then to listen for examples of where they're willing to to try and learn something that is actually outside of work, that doesn't necessarily have a purpose,
Mhm.
right? Their willingness to share the mistakes that they've made in a very detailed way.
Okay. Does that
So
get
not
around the
being
fact that people are hyper prepared for interviews and they think about these types of questions? It's a fairly common thing. Tell me about a time you failed, or tell me something you're interested in. And there's usually a prepared. I know that I need to tell you what you want to hear in order to get the job.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, and the thing is, then you can ask, "Well, give me another example. Give me another
Okay.
example," right? Because usually people have 1 or maybe they have 2, right? And then or tell me a time when someone gave you constructive feedback and how did you react to it? And,
Wait, hang on. Are
so
you saying that interview people who conduct interviews, hiring managers should practice curiosity?
oh, yes. Yes,
Asking
yeah.
more questions. I love this,
Yeah.
right? Like, okay,
Yes,
great.
yeah. And then
Tell me a little bit
and
more about
also
that.
the and asking and see what questions that they have for you. I
Mhm.
mean, I remember actually one job interview I had, I didn't realize this until 40 minutes in, and they said, Julie, you've been asking us questions for 40 minutes. We need to ask you some questions now." So, right, because you can actually learn a lot from someone by the questions that they ask.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
And then
Okay.
also, I like to also as the for the job candidate to ask to even ask the question of why and why, to see how that person responds. Because are they defensive? Are they kind of feeling you shouldn't be asking me that question in this?
Can you give me
Uh,
an example?
so just hey, so why do we? So let's say Jeff, you are the interviewer and I'm
Okay.
the job candidate, right? And she's like, so why do you approach the work in this way?
Okay.
And if you are, as the hiring manager or as the interviewer, feeling defensive about that, then that can actually give me some insight
So the other way around,
into
like
the work. Yeah.
these
Mhm.
aren't curious or people who might potentially be open to doing
All
things
my
a different way
questions,
or
right?
or
Like, do
what?
they actually react well? Like, oh, that's a good question. Let me explain.
Mhm.
Or is
Mhm.
it like this? I can't believe you asked me. Don't you know that I'm interviewing you?
That happens a lot. Sure.
So, and so, because it's, I mean, like with job interviews, it's a two-way street. We have to also make sure that, I mean, the job candidate also has to make sure that uh, that their understanding is this a place where I want to work? Because if you aren't, then there's also partial responsibility on you for not trying to ask those questions to see, like, am I going to like working here or not?
And we see a wide range in my world of people who can interviewers, company hiring managers who some of them want to be asked questions and be challenged, especially in sales. I want them to sell
Mhm,
me.
mhm,
And then some
mhm.
of them are Like, no, 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 I'm interviewing. I have a process, and I
Mhm,
see value in both of those. Um, I'm still curious, sort of, how can some because when people write job descriptions, they
mhm.
want someone who has all of the everything. They want the unicorn. Right? I want somebody who's curious and open to coaching, but they also already know everything about how to do their job. How do they write better job descriptions? How do they then also still truly? Is there another tool for getting into this? Is this person actually coachable? Are they going to be a good fit? I just don't. My
Yeah, and so
only reason
part of
I'm
it is
asking is I
actually
feel like
also
there's
being
not a
able to
lot of.
say, so that fit part is, I think it's also on the interviewer to explain, "Hey, this is our culture.
Hmm, hmm.
This is why we do things." Right? Kind
Okay.
of explaining that internal logic, right? And so and actually you could use the 7 forms of respect to say, "Hey, this is how we behave with one another."
Oh wow, I love that.
Just to let you know that, uh, that attention is really important to us. And so even on Zoom calls, we all have our cameras on and no one's multitasking, and that is the expectation. And then there are some people, I mean, even like, and there can be so many reasons for why you need to multitask, right? Like you could have ADHD and be like, no, I can't. Like, I
Right.
need multiple things, right? And that's going to be really hard for you. And then maybe that's where it's like, oh, let's have a accommodation or whatever, right? But so just saying like, these are the ways that we behave with one another. And uh, how do you feel about that?
Hmm, hmm.
And then this is, and this is why. So I think that it kind of the back and forth, and then there's a there's a really good book that with these interview questions that have lots of really good questions around self-awareness. I read it like after, uh, I read it just to read it, not because I needed to interview. So I'll have to send you that resource because I remember reading the questions and there I was like, wow, these are really great questions.
Okay, that'd be great.
But I want to say for the practice of curiosity, that it boils down to 3 elements. And the first element is increasing self awareness. And the second element is building relationships. And the third one is communicating clearly. And so those are all these things that we continually have to practice. And even like listening, like when in that interview part, just watching for how that person listens.
Hmm. Interesting. And I want to talk about your book.
Mhm.
Is that the kind of thing that people can learn from your book? These three things?
So not, I mean, there are the elements of practicing curiosity in all of my work. That's not, and so in with 7 forms of respect, though, it talks very particularly about the framework and how do we actually try to understand other people's perspectives.
Okay.
So in the book, I actually have lots of scenarios that say, "Hey, this is what's happening. What do you think about this situation?" And it's
Okay.
really trying to get people to go, "Oh, there are multiple interpretations of this situation." And I hadn't, because normally it's just like, no, that's just rude. You shouldn't do it that way. And it tries to get at like, well, what's another way of seeing this and having discussions with other people about that.
So yes, let me give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about. So like we have, so I have some tabs open here. This is your book,
Mhm.
but someone can buy it from your website at
Yes.
formsofrespect.com, right?
Yes, you can get it from Amazon. You can get it also like independent booksellers as well.
Okay.
And so yes, that's the book.
And and then
Mhm.
there's a frame. Can we see your framework here?
Yeah, you can see the framework
So
there.
we have an opportunity to look at these elements and read more about them. So if anybody who's curious,
Mhm.
what other resources?
There's a free quiz,
Okay,
so
yeah.
you can take the quiz and find out what your this is there's the quiz and there's the assessment. So the quiz is just 21 questions and it's just about how you give respect and generally. So we don't take into account a hierarchy here. And you'll
Okay.
get your results and see what are your preferences. I will say it can be when we've watched people take the quiz, people want to check everything. I do that. I do because it's kind of
Mhm.
like, what do I aspire to do? I should do that, so I'm gonna click on it. So it really requires kind of being real with yourself.
Okay.
Like, does
Yep.
that actually matter to me? So I just wanna give that little caveat.
I have to make choices. Okay,
Yes.
great. And then I noticed also you've got some great resources here on
Oh,
curiositybased.com.
yes.
Let
Yeah, so
me.
if you scroll down, one of the so there's uh, one of the things I'm really those are a lot of the essays and articles I've written. One of the things that I'm really proud of is Curiosity Base. We have this list of leadership books. If and you keep scrolling down on leadership, yes, right
This one
there.
here.
And
Okay.
so what this is every we research leadership books written by women, written by people of color, written by those with disabilities, and because one of the things that I'm really passionate about is diversity. When we talk about diversity in leadership, diversity in the workplace, it's not just about representation. It's not just about recruiting and promoting people of color and women. It's also about expanding our leadership narratives and who we read. We can actually enrich how we lead by expanding who we read. And so these lists have over 100, most of them have over 100 books each that just show, like, wow, there's a lot of books from these different perspectives that we normally don't think about, because most management leadership books are written by white men, and white male authors are awesome. And we also have a lot more options than we realize.
And we had touched on this earlier before I think we started the interview. There's that element of that ties in with DEI and reducing bias that happens within a retention effort, right? So you have we talk a little bit about sort of the fact that who you have on your team really is your best mode for growth
Mhm.
in that effort, as opposed to trying to recruit externally, which can be a
Yes, and so
little
yes.
insincere.
I mean, so much of I see so much of diversity efforts are around recruitment, and yet there are people on your team right now who are underrepresented on your team. And then how do you encourage them? How do you make this a workplace where it's just like, oh, I want to encourage other my friends and other people I know to apply here. And
Hmm.
so it goes that the classic sales. It's easier to get customers from your current customers
Right.
than it is to get
Yeah.
total strangers. And so that just goes back to making it a listening to people, and also just and having that clarity around that culture, um, so that it's a place where people feel proud that they're going to recruit.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and I want to call out your YouTube channel,
Yes, yes.
because you have some really fantastic content. Your content, by the way, is outrageously good. Like
Oh, thank you
it's
so
deep.
much. We're proud.
Um,
Team works
yeah.
on it, so we're really proud of that.
Well, yeah, it's inspiring. It's really really great. So if you look for curiosity based on YouTube, I think it's scrolling across the bottom as well. Anything in particular you like based on sort of the things we've talked about in the last few minutes of the people point people
Yes,
to?
there's one video in particular that um, yes, there's it's the different interpretations of respect, and this is just a 2.5 minute video that really shows how people interpret things differently.
Okay, is this the one where you
And
dress up in different clothes?
yes, yes, I'm playing three different characters, and so you can watch that, share it with people, and you can see, like, wow, I didn't see it that way, because oftentimes people are like, oh, I agree with that person or that person on that. I'm and yes, so would love
I'll put
for
that.
you to
Yeah,
watch that and to subscribe to the channel as well. We actually do a new video every week.
excellent. All right. So in the last couple of minutes, anything else you'd like to talk about, to discuss, to anything we've forgotten? We definitely probably could carry on a conversation for the next
I know,
three
and
or
Jeff,
four
that's the
hours,
thing.
which
I'm
would
just
be
like, I
great.
don't want to start because I know we're going to continue, and punctuality is a big thing for me. So
How does someone engage with you? How I mean,
yes,
I'll
so
put up your
please,
contact here again in the front, but
yes.
how do they start a conversation with you?
So you can start a conversation. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. My website, curiositybase.com and formsofrespect.com. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn as well. And so would always really appreciate new subscribers to that. And yes, I mean, please reach out. And I always really love learning from new perspectives and engaging with people. So, and Jeff, thank you so much for inviting me onto this. I appreciate the conversation. It's always fun kind of talking about it from particular functional perspectives, like in this case, sales. So,
The pleasure's all mine. This is one of my favorite topics, to be able to really, bring some value to the network about how we can think creatively about these very difficult challenges like culture, retention. I mean, especially the hiring market right now is unique, to say the least. So, this has been great. Hopefully, you'll come back and do it again.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Julie.